My name's Charlie Clemmer. I know quite a few people either in person or at least from the Twitters and that kind of stuff. I'm with Skyfii, Senior Director of Systems Engineering, so working on the technical side of how we do what we do. I'll run through a little bit, but what's important I think is Skyfii started off as that guest Wi-Fi, guest analytics, retail marketing type of platform. Ultimately, as we get into more of the API and the flexibility in the infrastructure itself, we're able to take it beyond just being that I do a captive portal and I can get you online and we can send you to a web portal or to an ad, and really make this more about either a business efficiency, business optimization, customer experience, customer sat type of engagement. So as we look at it, Skyfii effectively is a product. We have three pieces. We start off with the IO Connect, which is basically kind of that first piece that you think about, right? It's how do I get connected to the Wi-Fi? It's the captive portal page if we're using one, et cetera. But I'll take it a step further, and it's actually where we start to get that API feed. So how we're pulling stats from the radios, how we're pulling it from the infrastructure, letting me know. But we'll also turn it around a little bit different, and I can look for things like integration with ClearPass to take this to where it's not the nasty buzzword of it's a captive portal and I'm making my guest Wi-Fi have a bit more friction, but I'm taking it and using it to pull in authentication through Active Directory. I know some additional information. I didn't have to get it from a captive portal, and we'll use that as part of our intelligence. Inside is really the analytics dashboard, so it's some of the kind of basic table stakes that I think most of us are familiar with. I'll talk a little bit more about it and get into a demo to show it, and really the bulk of this will come out of the demo side, how we're using it. But it's taking that information that we then feed in through ClearPass, through AIL, as Peter mentioned earlier, pulling in some of the location data out of Airwave, connecting in through a mobile phone app, so something like the Meridian, where I'm leveraging beacons that even though they don't necessarily talk through AIL or they don't talk back to me directly, we're able to pull in some additional information and make this a bit more content rich. And then I get into Engage, and this is really kind of the meat and potatoes of it, where we make it worthwhile and go in with it. So it's doing things like the retail example, since that's where we started, but ultimately this could be doing a public safety type notification, or letting me know that, letting maintenance know that I have an escalator that's gone out of service and I need to have looked at, or my elevators aren't working or something along those lines. So as I get into the demo here, take me 1 second to get logged in. And I'm going to I want to show two different environments here that'll be interesting, I think. So I started off talking about, let me zoom in here. Either way. There's two different pieces. There's the first part on the Connect, so it's pulling in the information, letting me know what's going on. We start off, some of the stats I think are pretty basic. Again, kind of the table stakes, right? It's looking for visitors. From my perspective, visitors would be an unassociated client. So it's that smartphone in my pocket. It's my watch that I turned off Bluetooth, and so it's looking for a network. It's all those devices that I don't know anything about. I may not know a lot about them, but there's still some useful information that I can gather out of them. So we're going to report those. The next piece is kind of obvious. It's the sessions, right? It's the people that get connected to guests. I want to know how many people connected, how long they were on, what they were doing. I'm going to start to do a breakout where I can look for things like dwell time. So dwell time is pretty self-explanatory, the average length of time, but I want to look at it in a couple of different ways. If I mention that unassociated users or visitors are a little unique, I may want to break out my dwell time for visitors versus clients. Right? Some of the conversations we'll have, you look at different client behaviors, and I know we've got a lot of resources that track how clients behave and how often do they probe and what do they do when they're in different sleep states. This becomes kind of that key part. My end goal is I'd like to have as many people on Wi-Fi as I can get on there. I get better information when they're on Wi-Fi, but if people won't connect or they just don't know my Wi-Fi is available, I still want to get information from them. So if that's the basic Connect piece, where this starts to get a little more interesting for me we start looking at things like passerbys. So what is a passerby? It's that idea that if a visitor is an unassociated client and a connected user is somebody that connected to my Wi-Fi, this passerby is somebody that's in that state. They didn't connect to my network, but I'm using the location service, either triangulating through AIL and figuring out that they're not in my facility, or just looking for things like receive signal strength. So I hear you're on one of my perimeter APs, or I hear you from a perimeter AP, but I hear you at a signal strength of -90, so I can deduce that you're not in my venue. I'll use this, as Ozer said, kind of looking at it from the retail side. I want to keep track of what my opportunity is, how many people pass by my venue. If I'm a retail customer, what was my opportunity? How many people could I pull into my Starbucks? The airports that I talk to, I'm just keeping track of how many people came by to drop off passengers. I still want to know total counts. We'll look at it a couple of different ways. I may integrate in with video surveillance, CCTV type systems to do car counting and those kind of things. But I still want to keep track of not just how many cars, but how many people or how many devices came in through there. I take all this, and one of the key pieces that I'm going to gather out of that is what's my window conversion. So if I had these passerbys, if I saw people here, and we can get into a lot of questions, and I probably should have phrased that starting off. If you guys have any questions, interrupt me, and happy to deal with them as they come up when I'm changing through different topics. But the idea is with a passerby, I've seen you're a probing device. Your device may only probe once every 5 minutes, 2 minutes, 30 minutes, depending on battery life, right? So I have a small window to try and do something. Window conversion could be the old marketing display. I've got signage on the window. I've got some sort of display I'm going to try and lure you in. It may be kind of the more overt. I want to send a push notification, or I want to do something to let you know, hey, Jake's a coffee addict, so come on in and I'll give you some coffee and we'll do it at a deal. My window conversion then is measuring that. I saw you out as a passerby long enough to fit a set of demographics that you've labeled. I want a minimum time, I want a maximum time, I want a signal strength, something that allows me to target that you're a passerby. I took some action, and then as a consequence of that action, now you came into my store. So you transition from being a passerby where you're not in the venue to now being inside the venue. So we'll track that, and I'll get into that a little bit more as we talk about engagements, but the key piece for us is anytime I do an engagement, anytime I take an action, I want to measure how effective that action was. And that could be something like custom-coded QR codes. If I'm sending in a retail example, coupons and trying to drive a change in behavior, how many of those coupons came back, and can I track, this is the coupon that I sent Ryan, or this is the coupon that I sent George, and did they actually follow through with it? As we get into more of the analytics then, so using that data, we get some of the basic pieces around visitor recency. So how often do people come? I'm looking for things like loyalty, right? How recent were their visits? How frequent are they? So if I'm Starbucks, this counts my visits and number of visits per day and things like that. I may be in a Starbucks too many times in the course of a day. How often do I connect to Wi-Fi? How recent? How much data am I using? So some interesting pieces that allow me to see kind of how my network is being used. This is going to be similar to what we would see off of a network management console, but the idea is I'm framing it a little bit different. It's data, it's analytics, it's anonymized so that I'm not necessarily keeping track of here's what Charlie does on my network or anybody else that comes on, but I'm looking for the trends. I want to take this, I want to take it a step further and look at the demographic information, so I can look at men versus women. I can look at this age range versus that age range, a new customer versus a returning customer, et cetera. We get some interesting pieces. Again, I'll use as part of the analytics the profiling that happens at the network layer. So we look at DHCP, fingerprinting, those kind of things. I want to understand what types of devices, how is my network being used by my visitors. Again, so maybe it helps me decide when my next AP refresh comes, or what type of content I want to put out via an email. And then as we start expanding into the capabilities that come off of AIL, that come out of AOS 8 with the API feeds, now I can start to take data like what Aruba provides inside of AppRF and start capturing additional information. Again, I'm not keeping track of Charlie went and searched these particular commerce sites, but I want to go back and look to see, you're on my network, where are you going? If I'm a retail customer, am I being showroomed? If I'm a healthcare customer, is somebody going back and either filling out a prescription through the pharmacy, or are they going back to the health board and complaining about something that happened here? We're looking at it, and again, keeping trends, and I may use this as an actionable event as we get down the road. And then finally, some things like data usage. How's my network being utilized? Getting the pie charts, et cetera. The interesting thing here is I can dig into any of these pieces of information. So I can click in on one of the widgets in the dashboard, get into my tables. We're looking at this as a time vector. So I can come back and look for things. Right now, I'm looking at it over a 30-day window. We can zoom in on a as short as a 1 day. I can zoom out as far as a year. I may go back and look for things like how are we over the last week. But I've got the ability to set up emails if I'm looking for trends and going from there on having it. I can also go back and have the entire dashboard sent to me as an email. So the thinking, I may have somebody that's in maintenance that maybe they don't care as much about the total sessions or registrations, et cetera. They can pull out their widgets, have this email to me on a regular basis. And with anything where I'm using the analytics to try and change behavior, it's all about having that baseline. So I want to do some measuring. I want to see how things are going. I want to implement a change and then see how that change went. So if I take the insights one step further, we'll get to things where now I can start to do some interesting pieces again, looking at how my facility is being used. And in this case, I'm looking at visitor flow. So we've gone through, I think we're all familiar with heat maps. I'll use them inside of Ekahau to do a predictive survey. I use them inside of Airwave if I'm doing network management. I want to see where my APs are active, what's down. I can do the client locating and troubleshooting from there. My use case is going to be a little bit different. So I'm identifying different zones, and I want to keep track of, again, behaviors. So in this case, I might be a mall property, and I want to look at, for my returning users, so people that I've seen come to the mall more than once, what's their primary way into the facility? An airport likes to look at this and see, where are people parking their cars? How do I get in? What entrances are used? What parking garages are more favorable, et cetera. I can highlight over my different zones, and I can look for things like dwell time for this particular zone. So if I had the widget before that shows on average, here's how long people tend to stay in my facility. Now I can start to break it out and figure out, again, if I'm an airport, what does my TSA security line look like? What is that average dwell time or that average wait there? Using the airport example again, I could go back and look for things like if I connect in through this particular location, here's how many people actually drop off and go somewhere else. So if I had you as a passerby, you did the drive-through to drop off your family member as they were on the flight out of town, or you guys were on the flight here. If somebody actually came in, did they come into ticketing and then turn around and leave?
Charlie?
Yep.
Can you look back upstream the same way and to say, given a certain area, where did users come from to get to this place?
It builds out so I can look for things.
Yeah, similar to that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So as you're stepping through, we can look at the return site. And the other interesting piece, so good point. I can also turn around and break it down and look for things like, instead of new versus returning user, break it down into genders and look for those types of trends. So the idea being, if I wanted to see, great, so how many people come into the food court, and then where do they go from the food court, or how many people go from a different entrance out to other sites, we can go through there. And this starts to get a little busy if I don't turn off the other locations that we had, but you guys get the idea. So this is interesting to show me, again, it's all based on the analytics. You potentially didn't connect to the Wi-Fi at all. This is going to be more accurate if I got you connected to Wi-Fi, so it's up to me to give you a compelling reason to get on Wi-Fi. But this shows me kind of how the venue's being used and go from in that historical context. The other piece that I think is interesting is we'll jump into a heat map. Again, very similar to something that you might see in Airwave or in Meridian. The difference being this is just plotting user density, and it's looking at it over hourly samples. But again, if I'm trying to change this behavior, I want to look for things like, I know this is a bank of escalators. Why is it so dense in that bank of escalators? In this case, I've got a sliding scale. Red means I've got almost 1,000 people in there in that hourly sample. But I can look around, I've got another set of escalators here, there's hardly anybody there, I've got escalators down there, there's nobody there. Why is that bank of escalators so important to me? And I may not know initially, but this idea, again, starting with the baseline, I'm looking to identify a problem or looking to identify something that I want to take action on. And we can go back and use this then to identify, maybe I need to improve signage. I need to let people know through digital signage, through emails, whatever, that there's another escalator bank. Maybe, the problem is that I've got a bank of escalators that aren't currently working. But I'm able to capture this trend, and then I could go back and say, well, if this was today's date, what did this actually look like if I back up, 2 months ago? And go back and do a replay on the same event. And actually for this side, I know it's going to be about the same. But it gives me those trends, right? So it shows me what's going on and how it's being used. The compelling point, I think, when we're going through this is ultimately it all comes down to what do I do with this data. So it's the third piece off the slide that I'd mentioned previously where we talk about engage. Engagement is basically taking a digital response. So that could be an email, it could be an SMS, it could be triggering digital signage, it could be doing a pushback through the Meridian app, it could be feeding another system via external API. So we take these API feeds in from Meridian, from Ale, we can turn around and ship API feeds back out to trigger digital signage in other places. But it gives me a bit more control over what I want to define my target is. So again, this is looking at it from a guest Wi-Fi experience, but a lot of this data could have been fed up through ClearPass. It could have been an end user authenticating against Active Directory, and so part of what I'm going to capture is departments instead of languages, or different groups or different set of access rights versus countries and languages spoken. I'm then going to build my content. On the content side, this is where we'll go back and create things like I want to go create a passbook coupon. So I mentioned we want to engage with users. I can send an email, I can let people know what's going on, I can send an SMS, and there's different reasons or different thought processes behind what we would do. But it basically gives me a templated approach to go back and say, I'm not a marketing guy, I don't know anything about setting up a barcode, but I can come through here, pick out what I want to set up, what type of coupon does this need to be, what my colors need to look like, all that good stuff. What type of barcode do I want to use? And it ends up creating that customized, unique barcode per engagement. And then ultimately, I create the engagement itself. This is the triggered event. This is what do I want to do? And I can step through it. I mentioned a couple of different pieces already. You've got the idea of a bulk engagement, so it's an email. I've categorized based off people that are on my network or have connected to guests. I can look for things like, let me jump in here. I can look for things like, when was the last time you were on? How often have you been on the network? Where did you last connect from? We're using a lot of different triggers to identify what makes sense. So if I'm looking at it more in the marketing context, the big use case was always, to use the coffee example earlier, if I know I have a caffeine addiction or a caffeine problem and I'm always at Starbucks, I might use the example of I want to detect the next time I'm close to a Starbucks, and then we're going to do a push notification to prod me that, hey, come on in and get another caffeine fix. If I expand that a step further, I could use this in that retail space that says, hey, I sell big screen TVs, so when I see Ryan come in, let's go ahead and send him a push notification and let him know I got a discount on 70-inch TVs. Come on in and buy 3. The challenge, though, is what if Ryan had already decided that he wanted to buy that TV, he was coming in and was headed back there. Do I really want to send a push notification and say, I'm going to give you a discount on something you were already going to buy? I'll give you a discount because I like you. But the idea is this needs to be time sensitive and it needs to be dependent on what's going on. I don't need to change behavior, or in that case, if Ryan was already walking back to the big screen TVs to buy a TV, that's not a behavior I want to change. We'll let that play out. If I'm stuck in an elevator and I've got my zone identified as an elevator and we recognize that my visit duration is now in 10 minutes, that's unusual. I shouldn't be in an elevator for 10 minutes. I'm probably at the WLAN Pros conference in Dallas and stuck in an elevator and singing songs on Twitter. So we can take some kind of action about it, right?
Already.
The other piece that I think is critical, I've got a couple of apps that I like to make fun of, but it's an outdoor wholesaler that likes to send me 5 push notifications at a time. When they have a sale, they've got to let me know they got boots on sale, they got kayaks on sale, they have all this stuff on sale. I don't necessarily want to do that. That type of behavior is going to more likely turn people off, have them either uninstall my app or at least turn notifications off. So I want to be able to do smart things like rate limit it, kind of set a priority. If I have 3 different things that make sense, so George walks into my store and I could hit him with 3 different things. I got cowboy hats, boots, and belts. Let's prioritize and pick which one's important. Send that one first, and then maybe the next one waits. And the next one can wait a week, it can wait whatever, or I want to hit a couple of different things at once. So that's the engagement side. Any questions kind of about it? I appreciate the ones that we have had.
Does this require Aruba OS 8 to get this functionality?
It does not. So we've been an Aruba partner for about 4.5 years. The primary piece that we're taking from is Ale. We've always used Ale as the location piece. We've had the tie-in for Airwave to pull heat maps over and those kind of things. With AOS 8, we start to open up new sources of context about the user. It's really identified around, I want to get beyond just being guest and retail Wi-Fi and start looking for other verticals like, does this make sense in healthcare? Does it make sense in education? And so I'm not necessarily getting a captive portal feed. The app RF feed's another one. So if I'm in an education environment, maybe I'm not looking for, are you hitting a commerce site? I want to know if you're hitting a social media or a chat site. This is test day, and we're doing standardized tests, so you shouldn't be hitting these other types of sites. It's taking that type of context, that type of data feed from the infrastructure, and allowing us to see more about what's going on and then react accordingly. So short answer is no, but it definitely plays better.
Kind of a simple question back related to the heat map you showed a second ago. That kind of showed a snapshot in time.
Right.
Can you aggregate that over a time period as well, to say a custom time period, to say in a given day, business day or given week or whatever? Can you customize that heat map that way?
Right now, no. It's showing you on a day sample, but I like that idea. So kind of looking at for the course of a day, or potentially even bigger if I'm looking at it over like the course of a week.
Or even, one of the interesting things about looking at data like that is, sometimes you don't want that information averaged for off business hours as well. So maybe even looking at it during business hours only, Monday through Friday for this week. The kind of customization would be cool.
Yeah. So one of the things that comes into the analytics side is also looking at. So again, those numbers we would kind of tend to look at them as being raw numbers coming off an Ale feed. We do have the intelligence on the back end to try and differentiate to say, and this got to be fun with the airports, but what defines a visitor versus an employee? So in a retail environment, in a mall environment, unless you're my wife and can go shop for 4 hours, if you're there for 4 hours or longer, you're probably an employee working. One of the other fun things is, as a mall owner, I may have all the common areas, but I don't have in store itself. If I may have a Neiman Marcus, I may have some other big box stores. So you could potentially go into an area for an extended amount of time, do your shopping, you're getting fitted for clothes or whatever, and then when you come back in the mall, do I see that as being a new visit? Do I count you as being, man, he's really loyal, he comes back and every hour and a half I see him again, this guy likes me? Or is it just part of the same trip? So part of the analytics is looking at that number. And if I'm looking back at the dashboard, I'll see kind of a connected right now, here's my visitor count. We'll ultimately end up smoothing over that data to provide the historical pieces that say, okay, well, I was looking at this, and actually for those 4 visits that I thought I saw you had in one day, if you look at it over, in hindsight, this was really probably 1 visit, so let's go update those counters.
Are those kind of on-off buttons for an algorithm, or is some of that more granularly customizable? For example, maybe I have some kind of a presence indicator at the employee entrance. I can flag all my employees coming through them. If I come through that door, then I know that they're employees or their staff. So
it's multiple pieces. It's not an on-off switch, but there could be those different data points. If I see you 3 days in a row, then you might be an employee and not a consumer.
Okay.
But yeah.
Charlie, healthcare. Have you deployed it in healthcare? If so, what kind of alerts are you driving? What are some use cases? Because we're struggling with that, right?
Yep.
Because HIPAA collecting information.
Right.
We want to avoid all that.
Yep.
At all costs. But I'm just curious. Any feedback on healthcare installations or potential healthcare installations where you want to drive? Maybe you're going past the gift shop or.
Right. So in today's setup, if I was talking to something we deploy today, it would be purely from that retail perspective, where I'm trying to define, okay, here's people coming through, and I'm going to work in conjunction with a Meridian app that's helping me with wayfinding, and I want to recognize that you're coming by a gift shop or you're coming by the cafeteria and do something. Ultimately, I think we take that a step further, and now I'm using the heat maps to identify here are my guests versus here are my doctors, or here are my staff that I have. And we want to take things, again, like Meridian, where at Atmosphere last year we had to find my friend. Well, that could turn into find my doctor, or find a doctor if I need to keep this anonymized, so I'm not pointing out particular people. The big challenge is that we're looking at it from an anonymized feed where it's not keeping track of here's what Charlie did, but I want to know if I need help, here's somebody that can help me, and where do we go? Or here's a concentration of patients and there's no nurses around, or there's no administrative people around, we need to send some additional people over there. So a couple of ideas, and then just looking at it again kind of at a high level, monitoring protocol. So if doctors are coming into rooms, can I have a zone set up that's near the sink to make sure they're washing their hands, or they're hitting the pharmacy and dispensing what they need to do, and just kind of tracking that overall. What is the time each doctor is, or not each doctor, what's the time staff are spending in a room, and I'm tying that back to my healthcare patient SAT scores to make sure that are we getting the type of attention or the type of interaction with the patients that we'd expect to see, and how do I follow up and verify that with metrics?